8. Bitter homeowner booby traps property. Gregory Rodvelt's legal problems began long before 2016, when his 90-year-old mother sued him for elder abuse. By then, he already had a lengthy track record that included past arrests for domestic abuse, assault, and other violent crimes. The judge ordered Rodvelt to pay $2.1 million to his elderly mother. He still hadn't paid the debt when he was jailed in 2017 for an unrelated incident involving the possession of illegal explosives. Rodvelt was released in 2018 so he could relinquish his home in Oregon to satisfy the judgment. But he wasn't supposed to actually go to the house, and when authorities found out that he did, they sent officers to make sure it was safe. A sign at the edge of the driveway warned that the rural property was protected with improvised devices. There was a minivan blocking the driveway, rigged with steel traps, similar to those used for catching animals. At the front gate, a circular hot tub was perched on its side, positioned to roll over anyone who dared to try entering. After getting past the jacuzzi, an FBI agent moved a wheelchair and triggered another booby trap. He was shot in the leg, and there was a lot of blood, but he survived. Rodvelt was charged with assault on a federal officer. According to the most recent update from 2020, the case is still pending. If convicted, he could face life in prison. In the meantime, court records show that he's currently serving a minimum 5-year sentence in Arizona on a separate case. 7. Combustible lunchbox. One evening in 2017, the Volusia County Sheriff's Office in Florida received a call from a homeowner who said his drunk son, 31-year-old Christopher Langer, was knocking down furniture and threatening him with an explosive device. At the scene, deputies found a stockpile of dangerous devices and chemicals, including a booby-trapped SpongeBob SquarePants lunchbox and a hand grenade. They also found substances similar to those used in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing, including nitric acid, as well as 200 containers containing unknown powders, acids, and other materials. Deputies evacuated the property and several nearby homes and called in a bomb squad, who worked overnight and into the morning. A large number of the bottles were found to contain bodily fluids rather than bomb-making materials, and at least 3 explosive devices were neutralized at the scene. Volusia County Sheriff Mike Chitwood told News 6 Orlando that Langer had all the components necessary to make a weapon of mass destruction. He said that the SpongeBob lunchbox was all set to go, and that all it needed was a battery and gunpowder. In Chitwood's words, Langer clearly had intentions to mix the chemicals together into deadly form, and he could have blown up the block. Langer was charged with possessing a destructive device, and was held without bond for the next 18 months while the case played out in court. He was sentenced to 2 years in state prison with credit for time served. 6. Explosive everyday objects. As World War II began to turn in favor of the Allies, Hitler and his top-ranking officials devised a plan to get last-minute revenge on forces who overtook Nazi-occupied territory. The unconventional plan involved hiding explosives in everyday objects like food, coal, helmets, cans of motor oil, and shaving supplies. As the plot evolved, the Nazis became increasingly creative, and even toyed with the idea of making explosive bangers and mash to tempt British forces with. If and when the Allies encroached upon Nazi-occupied territory and took over villages, their plan was to leave the rigged items behind as they evacuated, and to strategically plant them in places where the invading forces were likely to touch and activate them. The Germans also hoped to use the booby-trapped items to blow up ships and kill high-ranking Allied political and military leaders. Thankfully, the British intelligence agency MI5 caught on to the ruse in time to stop it from doing much damage. In 1943, MI5 operative Victor Rothschild discovered plans to create a combustible chocolate bar. It would be wrapped with a label that said Peter's Chocolate and would be programmed to explode as soon as someone broke off a square to snack on. The Nazis hoped to somehow land one of the bars into the hands of British Prime Minister Winston Churchill, but luckily this never happened. An MI5 artist named Lawrence Fish proposed ideas for similar devices for the agency's counter-sabotage unit. His original drawings were rediscovered in the Rothschilds' family's home in 2015, after being lost for more than 70 years. Like the German explosives, none of the items ever made it past the planning stage, but the drawings offer a fascinating look into the lengths that both the Nazis and the Allies almost went in their bids to win the war. 5. Venomous snake traps. The Vietcong had a lot of tricks up their sleeve when it came to sabotaging American troops, and they didn't stop at the use of hand grenades and sharpened sticks that impaled soldiers and caused excruciating pain. They also carried pit vipers and other highly venomous snakes in their packs, with the idea that any enemies who searched through their pack would get bitten. VC soldiers also tied the snakes to bamboo tripwires and hid them throughout their tunnels, in hopes that the reptiles would bite American tunnel rats who ventured into the dark, narrow labyrinths. The mechanism earned the pit vipers the nickname of the three-step snake, because that's how long US soldiers said it would take before the venom killed the victim. Tunnel rats were specifically trained to identify and disarm these traps, but it didn't make the job any less dangerous. Smoke guerrilla fighters out or drive them out with tear gas often failed. At some point, the military realized that the only way to impose on the tunnels was to send soldiers inside of them. Entering the tunnels came with many dangers, in addition to the possibility of encountering a booby trap. Poorly constructed tunnels sometimes collapsed, and the Vietcong purposely built them so they were easy to flood, in case the need to drown a tunnel rat arose. In some cases, VC fighters attacked tunnel rats with poison gas. The subterranean pathways were also filled with dangerous creatures other than pit vipers, including disease-carrying rats, venomous scorpions, and ants. Due to the unavoidable dangers that come along with the job, tunnel rats suffered shockingly high casualty rates compared to many other units. In addition to the hazards of entering the tunnels, just being on the ground was dangerous for tunnel rats due to the US military's use of Agent Orange and other dangerous chemicals. As a result, a high percentage of tunnel rats who survived the war have suffered from lifelong health complications due to Agent Orange exposure. 4. Vietcong hand grenade booby traps. During the Vietnam War, the Vietcong proved to be masters when it came to booby traps, using an imaginative variety of materials and techniques. One of their most favored methods of ensnaring unsuspecting American soldiers was through the use of strategically placed hand grenades. Oftentimes, the explosives were hidden at the bases of tunnels and along streams, with a string connecting the grenade's safety pin to a stake in the ground. It was a simple system. All it took for the grenade to explode was a soldier to trip the wire. The Vietcong also rigged pathways by removing the safety pins from grenades and stuffing them inside cans, which kept the safety held down. They tied the bomb to a string, and when the soldier stepped on the tripwire, it pulled the grenade out of the can, causing it to explode. Grenades were also hidden in more creative ways. When the Vietcong gave up their position, they sometimes rigged their flag with an explosive. Invading US troops would go to take the flag down, and the next thing they knew, a grenade was exploding in their face. In situations like this, the VC also set secondary booby traps and delayed secondary charges, so that those who rushed in to help injured soldiers also encountered explosives. 3. Cemetery guns. Grave robbing became a serious problem in the United States and Great Britain during the 18th and 19th centuries. when aspiring surgeons and medical students encountered a shortage of bodies to learn from. At the time, it was only legal to dissect the corpses of executed criminals and people who donated their bodies to science, which was highly uncommon. As a result, an illegal body trade emerged as a way to cater to this need. Grave robbers, or resurrection men, according to the lingo of the time, typically carried out their work under the cover of night, when there was no one around to stop them from exhuming the cadavers of complete strangers from their burial plots. Sadly, in some cases, these criminals faced little to no consequences for pillaging a grave, which was considered a misdemeanor in most parts of the US at the time. Grave robbers also often targeted cemeteries for poor, non-white, and other marginalized people, knowing that there was a far less chance that they would be prosecuted for it than if they were to steal from a cemetery filled with the corpses of wealthy white people. But not everyone tolerated grave robbing, and various strategies were implemented to combat the growing problem. One of the more dramatic methods came in the form of a weapon known as a cemetery gun, which was used along with a tripwire to rig certain graves. The system was designed to point the gun at the person who activated the tripwire and shoot them. There were also security systems called grave torpedoes. They took two different forms. In some cases, shotguns were rigged to shoot at a person when they removed a coffin lid. The other type of grave torpedo was a highly explosive device that blew up at the slightest disturbance, which unavoidably destroyed the human remains inside the grave, but also had the intended effect of inflicting deadly punishment on the grave robber. 2. Faulty ammunition. During the 1960s, the M16 became the standard issue rifle for troops in Vietnam, and while versions of it are still used today, it's historically known for being an unreliable gun that was prone to jamming and other malfunctions. But the Americans were apparently less concerned with improving the M16 than they were with sabotaging the enemy's Chinese-made AK-47 supply. In a covert small-arms sabotage campaign, codenamed Project Eldest Son, U.S. technicians assembled thousands of faulty AK-47 cartridges that were designed to explode when fired and planted them in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. This was done by replacing the smokeless powder in captured cartridges with a similar-looking but highly explosive substance that generated an enormous amount of pressure and caused the gun to explode. In most cases, the rifle components were projected backwards toward the shooter. Saboteurs also placed substitute fuses in the mortar shells. They then mixed the rigged cartridge or shell with perfectly good ammunition to disguise the cause of the impending blast. A clandestine group of Green Berets called the Studies and Observations Group, or SOG, were tasked with leaving the faulty supply with known guerrilla ammunition stashes. In some cases, operatives created new stashes in places where they predicted the ammunition might come in handy for the Vietcong, and where it would make sense to think that a previous VC unit had left the stash, rather than enemy American forces. The results of firing an AK-47 with sabotaged ammo were typically catastrophic for the soldier who was unlucky enough to pull the trigger, and anyone nearby. Guns are unavoidably dangerous, but most people don't expect to pull the trigger and have the weapon blow up in their face. The main goal of Project Eldest Son was to make the enemy question the safety and reliability of their ordnance. To encourage this line of thinking, American operatives forged documents to spark mistrust between the gun manufacturers and the troops using the weapons. In some ways, the mission was very successful, but it was discovered before even half of the rigged ammunition had been placed, sparking a rushed effort to distribute the rest before the Vietnamese discovered the true reason their guns were malfunctioning. Even after they learned about the operation, it had the damaging effect of compromising the safety of their ammunition stashes in combat areas where the materials were most needed. 1. Punji sticks. As much as 2% of the wounds suffered by American soldiers during the Vietnam War were caused by sharpened rods called punji sticks. typically made from bamboo and sometimes from metal. The simple yet ingenious devices were often planted in camouflaged pits by the Vietcong, with the hopes that American troops would pass through and walk over them. Unsuspecting soldiers stepped right into the holes, which were concealed by leaves and foliage, and were impaled by the Punji sticks, which were sometimes smeared with feces or plant poison to cause infection. These unusual weapons weren't necessarily meant to kill, but to cause agonizing pain and to slow down advancing units as they stopped to tend to the wounded. In most cases, they penetrated victims in the lower leg area. The Punji sticks were positioned to impale the limbs in a way where a soldier was unable to pull his leg away without causing further injury. In some cases, the concealed pits were built side by side, so that any troop who rushed to an injured soldier's aid also fell in and got hurt. Punji sticks were also placed in tunnels and used in conjunction with barbed wire. They were often strategically placed in areas where the Viet Cong expected American forces to take cover during an ambush, as a way to weaken their defense. Thanks for watching. Would you rather lose a few fingers from lighting a